Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mingyi Chen from Wenzhou-Kean University in China. I'm very glad to attend the third Entrepreneurship and Family Enterprise Research International Conference. My research topic is Impact of the New Street Vendor Regulation on Poverty Alleviation and Sustainable Livelihood during COVID-19 in China. And the co-author of this paper is Candy Lim Chu, PhD. Here is my contents. I divided my presentation into 10 parts, and they are background of the study, purpose of the study, research objective, significance of the study, literature review, methodology, results and discussion, conclusion, implication, and future research. And now let's start from the background of the study. During the last 50 years, the informal economy played a significant role in economic development in the whole world, and there were different kinds of informal economy started in both developed countries and developing countries. Due to the high potential for creating job opportunities, generating income, and many policymakers pay close attention to the informal sector and support the development of informal economy. And street vendor is one of them. Street vendors have the feature of self-employed, limited access, a barrier, rely on local resources, small-scale production, and labor-intensive. This form of economy offers poor and low-educated people from rural areas job and income-earning opportunities. However, street vending also brings some negative impacts, which demonstrates in affecting the city appearance, causing dangers and disorders, and the products selling may in poor quality. Thus, the Chinese government has banned the street vending activities by various regulations in recent years. In 2020, the outbreak of coronavirus epidemic hit the global economy, especially the very early affected country, China. The infection increased the unemployment rate, shutting down of manufacturing activities and service industries. Therefore, after years of cracking down on street vendors, the Chinese government is now allowing them back to give its COVID-ravaged economy a boost. Hence, the purpose of the study is aiming to investigate the impacts of the new street vendors regulation, which issued during the COVID-19 on poverty alleviation and sustainable livelihood situation in China. These are two research objectives. First, the primary objective is to find the variations between pre and post of COVID-19 by researching on the reasons for street vending, the contribution of street vending for the peddler's life, barriers confronting them, and their future plans. And the second objective is to compare the interviews taken pre and post of COVID-19 to see the significance of the new street vendor regulation on poverty alleviation and the sustainable livelihood. The significance of the study also can conclude in three areas. It will be a great value to new street vendors in considering the effectiveness of entering this business model. It will also be helpful for Chinese society to examine the impacts of new street vendors on poverty alleviation. And this study can help the society to realize the pros and cons of street vendor business and offer as a resource when the government considers to make future regulations. Then the fifth part is the literature review. The first point we researched was the diversity of street vendors, and there are two types based on location. The fixed store vendors locate in front of their houses or from the street pavement, and they are always bigger scaled businesses and selling products. They are not easy to bring or selling food that are not convenient to cook by using a push cart. And mobile vendors means the peddlers wandering in different areas to operate their businesses without a fixed store or place. And they are usually small-sized businesses and selling easy-made food or portative wares based on the various location street vendors do business in. They will face different challenges during the developing process of the street vendors. For instance, fixed store vendors will confront less harassment from municipality officers than the entrepreneurs who sell goods from public pavement spaces. However, the mobile vendors do not need to pay the rental fee of the store and decrease the operating costs of the business. The second point is informal employment and street vending in China. China has a rapid growth of informal employment in recent decades. Based on a local survey show that 8.8% of the urban floating population make a living through the street vendors, and which means that it can be estimated that there are about 19.5 million urban street vendors in China. Also, the floating population size has risen dramatically since 1990, with a remarkable increasing percentage of the total population from 7.7% in 1990 to 46 in 2010. In this case, we learn that most of the street vendors are migrants. According to the survey taken by Xue and Huang in Guangzhou, China, 92.5% of the migrants have no Guangzhou 户口, which is a system of household registration. These migrant street vendors are low educated, aged from 16 to 40, and only sell simple products. They aimed to sell their products to low-income residents, workers, undergraduates, and visitors because of the novelty of the products and the convenience. The next is the contribution of the street vending sector. The benefits mainly go to two aspects, which are for street vendors and for community development. This form of business helps the street vendors to generate income, provide job opportunities, give them free work times, which has low constraints, also gives the possibility to work in 2 shifts daily, which means the actual income generating may be double against the normal workers. On the other hand, street vending activities enhances the lively atmosphere and appearance of the city, providing door-to-door services which are really convenient, and the benefits are also illustrated in economic aspects like growing up the GDP. And the last part of literature review is the impact of COVID-19 epidemic on street vending in China and government regulation towards street vending in China. The outbreak of COVID-19 has devastated the livelihoods of street vendors, influenced their working ability, and left them fighting for survival. Based on the research analysis done by Virgo, it indicated that the lockdown, which is forced across the globe, had made over 2 billion informal workers into turmoil. As for alleviating the negative economic impacts of COVID-19, the measure of temporarily allow street vendors to sell food or other products was unexpectedly praised by Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. He said that the creation of 36,000 mobile stores has solved the unemployment of 100,000 people overnight, which indicated his support for relaxing the restriction on the previous street vendor regulation. The next part is methodology of this study. We used a qualitative methodology which keeps the same as the previous research I compared with. We used structured interviews, which also kept the same with previous one, to examine the impacts of new street vendor regulation and totally interviewed 75 street vendors. And then another method used is systematical stratified sampling, which requires to gather random, systematic, or convenience sampling. And the seventh part is results and discussion. This is the profile of the respondents, including their gender, age, education level, whether full-time or part-time work they treat, the time they have become a street vendor, and whether they have received any trainings to be a street vendor, agreements on the list, positive and negative effects of the street vendor regulation, reasons for street vending, and the contribution of the street vending for peddlers' lives. In conclusion, through the comparison between previous interviews which were taken by Xue and Huang in 2015 and by Turing Rong in 2017, with the interviews we took, we can conclude that for the reasons for street vending, the previous interviews showed many street vendors said their previous work is agriculture, but due to the lack of land, the poor soil, and bad harvest, it is impossible to rely on that to support a family. The other two main reasons are family issues, which made them lack money, and this job is no need to have high educated level. And the interviews we took show that reasons of street vending are fewer income they can earn during COVID-19 because of the shutting down, and the lockdown brought them family pressure. Another common reason they said is the government support their businesses in order to boost the economy. And for the second question of the contribution of street vending for peddlers' lives, the previous interviewees said that it is beneficial for their living condition, and the free mode of the work brought them emotional benefits without lots of stress. Another one is the high potential to earn big money in their perspectives. And this year's interviewees held different views on the contribution of street vending. They thought it can increase the family income. This year is a good time for them to start up a business, which begins from a street vending business, and they can accumulate experience through it. Some said it is also helpful for them to expand their social circle because they can meet, they can know to make business friends in the transaction process. And the third question is the barrier confronting them. In the past, the government spend is absolutely the biggest barrier, and the sellers need to avoid frequent patrols by chengguan or other street supervisors. And for some old peddlers, it is hard for them to carry heavy products to walk a long distance in order to selling more. The interviews we took show this question reply are mostly the competitive markets, and the vendors were worried about not making as much money as before. The last question for them is their future plan. Past peddlers showed a continuous attitude on street vending or until they achieve their personal goal depending on their family situation. However, many of this year's sellers plan to quit when their old jobs return to normal, and lots of them treat this activity as a part-time job. Part 9 is the implication of the study. For street vendors, the study's findings provide a reference for the potential street vendors to consider whether to start their businesses or not under the new regulation. And for government, the study's findings provide a reference for the department who are responsible for making and adjusting future regulations about street vendors. And the implication for the Chinese public is that the new street vendor regulation decreased unemployment rate during the period of COVID-19 and showed its promotion on poverty alleviation and sustainable livelihood. Lastly, the future plan. The future research. We suggested that the future researchers can study the negative effects of the street vending activities, which will be caused due to new street vendor regulation, and then to try to figure out which element mostly influenced the development of the street vendor in China. And they may find the appropriate strategy to deal with the negative effects after the street vending activities are supported by the government. That's all for the presentation of my research. If you have any questions, you can contact me by email, and I will be very glad to discuss this topic with you. Thank you very much.